My sister's husband accused me of stealing him, lied to her for weeks, now they're divorcing after less than a week of marriage. I, 24 female, have an older sister, 28 female, and we were really close growing up. I'd like to think that we still are, in spite of the things that have happened. A few months ago, my sister got engaged to her boyfriend, Tyler, 30 male, whom she'd been with for around 2 years. I was obviously thrilled for them, and she even asked me to be her maid of honor at her wedding, which I said yes to. I was involved in all the planning for the wedding right up until around 2 months ago when she suddenly stopped speaking to me altogether without any explanation. She'd removed me from the text thread we had for the bridesmaids and stopped answering my calls and texts altogether. I tried to visit her 2 days after she started ignoring me, but even that was of no use because she simply refused to open the door to me when I did go, and that was humiliating, so I stopped trying to talk to her after that. There was just no explanation as to why she was cutting me out of her life all of a sudden this way, and I was hurt about it. I asked my parents if they knew anything about this, but they were just as lost and confused as I was. I went on with my life as if nothing had happened, but my sister's behavior just kept bugging me, and the fact that I never got an explanation either was all the more hurtful. Then, around 6 weeks ago, the wedding invitations were sent and I didn't get one, which pretty much shattered me emotionally. My sister and I had been the best of friends growing up, so this was just incredibly difficult for me to deal with, but I didn't say anything to her since she'd made it sufficiently clear to me that she didn't want me around anymore. So I left the situation alone, and that was that. Yesterday, she finally got married and I was in the worst mental state possible. I spent the entire day in bed eating away my feelings because of how awful I felt that I wasn't up there with my sister, standing beside her as her maid of honor like we'd planned to. Around 3 in the afternoon, I received a call from my mother, which was really weird because why would she even call me while she was at my sister's wedding? I answered it nevertheless, and what she told me finally helped me make sense of my sister's behavior. While giving her wedding speech, my sister mentioned me as well and talked about how she was getting married despite many hardships, namely me, because apparently, I tried to steal Tyler from her at her engagement party itself. She'd joked about how I'd never been able to keep my hands off of things that belonged to her, but she'd assumed that I'd restrict myself to clothes and not her future husband. That had made a lot of people really awkward and uncomfortable, and my mother was obviously really upset, not just because of one of us but both. She'd called me up, furious after that speech, to ask why I'd do something like that if I valued my sister so much. I explained to her that I hadn't done anything of the sort, but she was too upset by the speech to listen to me. It was the fact that my sister had brought this up in front of all our family and friends that was bothering my mom, and she was more upset with my sister than she was with me, but unfortunately, since she couldn't just take my sister aside to scold her on her wedding day, I had to face her wrath instead, which I did gladly. After that phone call, I finally realized why my sister was giving me the silent treatment and had totally cut me out of her life, and I'd like to blame it all on Tyler. A few days before my sister stopped speaking to me, she'd hosted a low-key engagement party at her place and invited her closest friends and a select few family members. I'd attended that party and I'd worn a dress that my sister had bought for me. It was a lavender dress with a sweetheart neck, and it was a perfectly appropriate dress in my opinion. After a couple of drinks, we turned the music up and started dancing. I'd had a few glasses of champagne and I was already feeling quite drunk, so I didn't question it when Tyler asked me to accompany him to the kitchen and help him bring out some more snacks. I mean, he could have asked my sister but asked me instead, although at the time I just thought that maybe he couldn't find her or whatever. I didn't even question the fact that there were already several things laid out for people to snack on and we didn't need more, and accompanied him to the kitchen without a word. While we were in there, he commented on how beautiful I looked in my dress and I thanked him. After that, he started talking about how I didn't need to dress up just to catch his attention and I could do it without trying as well. Now obviously, I was pretty drunk by then and didn't know what to say, so I just blurted out something like, "Yeah, right, that was the intention," which was meant to be a joke, but I don't think he believed it was said as a joke and started staring at me intensely. We said nothing for a few seconds, and after that, all of a sudden, my sister walked in and she seemed extra chirpy. She pushed us out and told us to go enjoy ourselves, and I didn't think much of that interaction, since I didn't think, but now, I'm pretty sure that that's what she was so mad about. I don't know why she didn't just approach me that day itself and try to talk to me, and honestly, I should have been a little less of an idiot and told her instead of brushing it under the rug. My sister's fiancé was trying to flirt with me while I was drunk out of my senses, and I decided to crack a joke to defuse the situation. I felt like a fool. I truly didn't think that this could have been the reason for her to be mad at me because, well, obviously it was a joke, and moreover, I didn't expect her to believe that I was flirting back with her fiancé. I'd never do that to her or anyone, for that matter. I just think that the alcohol got to me and I messed up, but she should have spoken to me and tried to at least talk things through instead of just cutting me out of her life without an explanation. I could have explained my side of the story and this whole situation wouldn't have come into existence at all. Honestly, I blame Tyler for this entirely because he's the one who tried to flirt with me at his own engagement party. If anything, he should have been the one that my sister should have cut out of her life and not me. I don't know what to do now that I know why she was mad at me, though. Am I the a-hole for accidentally flirting back sarcastically with my sister's fiancé while I was drunk? Update 1, hey, guys. So since my sister was getting married, I decided not to speak to her or bother her at all since it was meant to be a happy day for her even though her husband was a cheat. Instead, I told my mom to convince her to talk to me somehow, and it took 3 days of relentless efforts from both me and my mother, but she finally agreed to meet me for lunch today. I invited her to come to my house because obviously, I didn't want to speak to her about this in front of Tyler. It was uncomfortable and she seemed very cold and distant, which hurt a little, but then I knew why exactly she was acting this way now. I didn't blame her, but I did feel a little put off by the fact that she didn't even bother to speak to me once about whatever she'd heard. As soon as she was seated, I didn't waste any time and started off by apologizing for whatever I'd said that day at the party and explained to her that I was really drunk and I meant to say it sarcastically. Never in a million years would I have done anything so cruel to her, and neither did I have any interest in Tyler at all. The conversation that she heard that day was one that Tyler initiated, and I was just trying to make it less intense by joking around because I didn't know how else to react. I was so taken aback by what he was saying, and also because, like I'd already said 1,000 times, I was drunk. While I was talking, my sister started looking really confused and interrupted me to say that she thought I was the one who'd initiated that conversation. Apparently, after the party was over, she'd confronted Tyler about what she'd heard, and he'd made up some story about how I was the one who'd been hitting on him for a long time now, and he just reciprocated this one time because I seemed really drunk and had followed him into the kitchen without him even asking me to. He'd told my sister that the reason he was flirting with me was because he was afraid that I'd hurt myself or throw a drunken tantrum and ruin the party if he shooed me away like he usually did. To back up his claims, he decided to show my sister a selfie that he'd downloaded from my Facebook account that I'd posted a couple of months ago, and told my sister that I'd sent him that selfie. He'd convinced her that I'd been texting him a lot to try and get with him, but out of respect, he deleted all the texts because he didn't want to create a rift between the two of us. But now, since this was all out in the open anyway, he was finally telling her the truth. Apparently, I'd been flirting with him for months and making him uncomfortable, and today was the last straw. He'd thrown in some tears as well to make his act seem more believable, and my sister had fallen for it as well. I even showed her my inbox and the few conversations that I'd had with Tyler. When I told her all of this, my sister started looking really disoriented, and rightfully so, because naturally, she didn't know whom to believe. Under ordinary circumstances, I would have been offended that she didn't automatically just believe me because I was her sister, but this was a complicated situation. She'd just gotten married to this guy who, as it turned out, had been hitting on her own sister, so naturally she felt like her world had turned upside down. I felt awful for her, and even more so because had I told her what was going on that day itself instead of trying to avoid confrontation, then none of this would have happened at all. After everything was out in the open, she said that she had to leave and didn't say much else, but I understood her dilemma. Now who she chooses to believe eventually is her decision, and I'll respect it, but I did my part and told her my side of the story, the truth, basically. I'm just hoping that this all works out well for both of us. Tyler can go to hell, for all I care. Update 2. So the last time I spoke to my sister was pretty bad for her, since she realized that her husband might not have been truthful to her and she might be with the wrong person entirely. That was 3 days ago, and since then, a lot of things have happened. Firstly, my sister confronted Tyler about what he'd told her regarding me hitting on him, and he'd outright denied it at first. He'd called me a liar and accused me of having no morals because I was still trying to break them up so that I could have him all to myself. But after my sister pressured him a bit and kept asking if he was telling her the truth, he ended up spilling the beans on what had happened and admitted that he'd made up the whole story to shift the blame onto me that night. And it wasn't even supposed to be his fault somehow because he'd felt pressured into covering for his behavior. He tried his very best to pass it all off as a drunken mistake on his part as well, but that wasn't gonna fool anyone because Tyler had made a huge deal of telling everyone that he was sticking to soda that night because he'd promised to drive his other friends home if they got too sloshed. So he wasn't drunk in the least and was fully in his senses, which meant that he'd tried to flirt with me on purpose, and whatever my sister had overheard was something that he'd initiated to get with me. Not only had he done that, but he'd also come up with an elaborate lie to cover up for his disgusting attempt at cheating and forced my sister to cut me off for several weeks for something that wasn't even my fault. My sister could forgive me for being sarcastic because I was drunk and stupid, but she absolutely couldn't forgive the fact that Tyler had tried to flirt with me at an event that was supposed to celebrate their engagement and then lied to her on top of that. They got into a huge fight and Tyler even tried to gaslight her then as well by saying that my sister shouldn't have put him under so much pressure that night and then maybe he wouldn't have lied in the first place because it was all just some harmless flirting which didn't mean anything. That effectively ruined any chance he had of redeeming himself, and my sister ended up leaving the house and came to me yesterday instead. She was visibly upset and barely said anything about what she was going through, which is bad because my sister has a tendency of bottling things up until she can't anymore and then has an inevitable mental breakdown over something petty. I've already started looking for family attorneys who can handle the annulment or divorce, whatever happens now. I'm sure she's not going to go back to him since she hasn't been answering any of his calls or texts and has told me to block him from her phone and delete all their pictures together as well because she can't bring herself to do it. It's really sad, but it is what it is. I, for one, am glad that she's ending it even if it's been less than a week since they got married because I don't think Tyler deserves someone as wonderful as my sister. This morning, she caught me crying silently at breakfast and asked me why I was upset. I was hesitant to tell her the real reason since it was actually because I held myself responsible for her marriage turned out to be a bust in less than a week. If only I hadn't behaved so stupidly on the night of her engagement party and told her what had happened instead of coming up with a sarcastic reply to brush his comment off, then maybe she would have realized that day itself that he was a cheater and wasn't going to remain loyal to her. That would have saved us both a lot of heartache and misery, but I chose to be an idiot and mess things up big time for her. I just felt so insanely guilty because of what had happened, but thankfully, my sister was considerate about it, and even at a time like this when she herself is going through something so huge, she tried to comfort me and told me that she didn't blame me because obviously, I was drunk and I wasn't thinking straight. She trusted me implicitly and knew that had this happened when I was sober then I wouldn't have thought about it even for a second before approaching her and telling her the truth. But the truth is that it hadn't even occurred to me later on that she might have heard that conversation, which is why I never bothered to tell her about it later on as well, even after I'd sobered up. I was too afraid to seem like a homewrecker or whatever, even though I wasn't one. I told her that and she reassured me that she didn't think any less of me because I'd been scared to tell her what had happened even after that day because it was confusing and new for both of us, and even she couldn't tell me for sure that she would have taken it kindly or believed what I was saying even if I had told her about Tyler's attempt to hit on me. Neither of us was perfect and we'd both messed up on some level, but the important thing was to acknowledge it and work on it instead of getting stuck on it. She'd chosen to forgive me and try to move past whatever had happened and suggested that I do the same. I'm just incredibly lucky that she chose to be kind and forgive me. She really is the best older sister I could have asked for, very honestly. Update 3, they're going to file for divorce with mutual consent. It's been a week since my sister moved out and Tyler put his heart and soul into making me seem like the bad guy, but it didn't work. He visited us 3 days back and fell to my sister's feet, begging her to take him back and making several promises about how he'd never do something like this again and how she was the only woman he loved. But my sister wasn't falling for it and told him that she was not going to get back with him under any circumstances whatsoever. I was in the room during the entire discussion, and after Tyler realized that my sister wasn't just going to blindly believe whatever he said to her, he started blaming me for all that had happened. I've got to say, he had some real audacity to show up at my house and make up lies about me right in front of me. Of course, that led to a very nasty verbal spat between me and Tyler when he accused me of trying to flirt with him and dropping hints. He said that I'd worn that dress that night just for him because and had been sending him signals throughout the evening, like laughing at his jokes and stealing glances at him throughout. Moreover, if I didn't want him to hit on me then I shouldn't have followed him to the kitchen all by myself. Apparently, these were the hints that I'd been dropping, and it was almost pathetic the way he was trying to paint me as the homewrecker here. Of course, I was laughing loudly at his jokes. I was sloshed and I would have probably laughed just as loudly had someone else made the same joke, so it wasn't about him. And the stolen glances or whatever were completely a figment of his imagination because truth be told, I'd chosen to not wear my glasses that day, and that meant that I was squinting at everything because I could barely see in the dark. None of the things he'd said were true, and I put him in his place for even daring to try and turn my sister against me once more when he knew very well that he was the one at fault here. Eventually, things got so heated that my sister had to intervene, otherwise it might have ended up in a physical injury. Tyler was right up in my face and was refusing to back off, probably trying to intimidate me, but it wasn't working. I might have been smaller than him in size, but I was trained in jiu-jitsu, and had he laid even a finger on me or my sister, I would have decked him and he would have learnt the lesson of a lifetime. He got lucky that my sister decided to stop things before it got too much to handle. Anyway, after he realized that blaming me wasn't going to work either, he went back to apologizing profusely to my sister and even started crying. I was afraid that she'd fall for it since he really seemed genuinely upset, but she merely told me to leave the room while she spoke to him in person. I did so, even though I was unwilling to leave her in the same room as that a-hole, but I had to give them some space. After around half an hour, I finally heard the door shut and guessed that he was finally gone now. My sister looked really dejected and I decided to wait for her to tell me what they'd talked about because I didn't want to overstep my boundaries and force her to tell me what they'd talked about mere seconds after he left. It was obviously really emotionally draining for her and I wanted her to take her time before she told me. So I just made her dinner while she lay in bed, and after dinner, she finally told me what they'd talked about in person. She'd told Tyler that she appreciated the time that she'd spent with him, but after what he did and how he betrayed her trust, she couldn't bring herself to be with him anymore. He tried to protest several times, but she explained to him as calmly as she could that the fact that he'd even considered cheating on her meant that she wasn't the one he actually loved or wanted to be with, no matter what he believed. And even though it would be pretty embarrassing for the both of them to file for divorce so soon after their marriage, it was something that they must do since she didn't want to waste her time with someone who didn't value her for who she was, and she was sure that he would have felt the same way had she been in his place. She'd guessed that the real reason Tyler had been so desperate to get her back was because it would look really weird to people if they didn't last even a year, and that was his major concern. She knew that he couldn't give less of a damn about her feelings, and as sad as it was, she couldn't do anything to change it, so she tried her best to explain to him why going ahead with the divorce would be the best move for both of them, since neither of them really truly wanted to be with each other at this point. He got a little emotional, to her surprise, and both of them ended up bidding each other goodbye in tears, which made me feel really sad for her, but at least she's not gonna be stuck in an unhappy loveless marriage, so that's good for her. I'm just amazed at how incredibly gracefully she chose to deal with the situation.